Hey guys, Captain Forest here, back with another Death Battle prediction collab video. Of course, I brought some awesome friends on the channel. Of course, Corin O'Keefe, introduce yourself.
What is up, everyone? Corn O'Keefe back yet again.
And of course, I have Alistair on the channel, and he's going to give his thoughts as well. So introduce yourself too.
Alright, dudes. Get this prediction ready. Set to go.
Awesome. So, how this is going to go down, Corin, he's going to give his thoughts near the end of the video, just like me and Alistair, but we're going to go ahead and go over both these characters. For starters, Corin will talk about Apocalypse first. He will go over stats. I will add on some additional things for Apocalypse, and then afterwards I will cover Black Adam. I will cover his stats, his AP, speed, and other assets that he brings to the table. So I'm going to go ahead and leave the mic over to Corin O'Keefe.
Alright. Appreciate that. So starting off with the AP of Apocalypse himself, the mutant god, the badass, the myth, So one of the first feats that comes to my mind that probably stands out to a lot of you is when Apocalypse fought a younger Thor. And in this fight, right, Apocalypse had his celestial armor on, and this younger Thor, he had a different weapon. It wasn't Mjolnir, still a potent uh, piece of weaponry, nonetheless. Very fucking potent. And when you really think about it, this, along with the strength of Thor behind it, was not able to break through the armor. Now, this is impressive and important because Thor had to go get an enchantment put on this powerful weapon to make it even more powerful. Some type of a very powerful enchantment. And then he was able to break through and ultimately defeat Apocalypse. He essentially broke through the armor that way. This is impressive because this implies the celestial armor itself is comparable to, actual celestial armor that celestials wear, which is very impressive because these guys can take attacks from, again, Asgardians, stuff like that. Like, they need enhancements, and even then, Celestials allowed somebody like Odin to cut into them with pretty much one of the most, if not the most powerful version of the Destroyer armor. They allowed him to do that even then. So it gets crazy. We also have Celestials, like the Celestial War, shattering apart the first firmament. Absolutely insane. They created, Celestials created the force that empowers the Ivory Kings, right? Because they created these beings that were actually more powerful than them to prevent this war between the Celestials from happening. So, yeah, Defenders Beyond, really good stuff. But that's just something to really consider in your mind when you think about this kind of stuff in this type of situation. So, moving on to something even more impressive is when Apocalypse fought two Thors at the same time. Odin's son Thor, right? And Jane Foster Thor. These two Thors were actually putting in work They were all, they had lightning around them. They were really riled up. Apocalypse, keep in mind, he enhanced his size. He became bigger. And this, in turn, further enhanced his strength, his power. And he was actually able to simultaneously fight both of these Thors, right, on pretty much equal footing for a decent period of time, a decent amount of time to say the least. He was eventually overwhelmed, which is not at all an anti-feat when you consider the fact, even fighting one Thor who's putting in work and trying to actually fight you and put you down, right? When you consider that, that's actually a feat in itself, let alone two, one of them being Jane freaking Foster. So we all know Thor has performed some incredible feats over the years. We've seen Eric Masterson Thor in a great deal of pain, pushed to his limit, essentially, right? Force back the full force of the world tree and the world engine, right? This is absolutely insane and something to really consider within your brain, right? Really think about it critically under a lens, because this feat gets overlooked. It's absolutely nonsense. It's insane. It's great because the world tree encompasses realms like the dimension of manifestation, the superflow, and a bunch of other realms that are so far beyond dimensionality. You really will have to start stacking beyond uncountable infinities conceptually, and then some to even hope to catch up. And here's something really crazy to take into consideration. A friend of ours known as Carimbus, a professional mathematician, with a little help from yours truly, but the professional mathematician known as Carimbus created a fantastic video. It goes over how large is a dimension of manifestation, and it gives really good arguments for 1s dimension of manifestation. Now, what do I mean by 1s? Well, I'll clarify. So 1s is a new tier on character stats and profiles wiki. And we will also be using terms for the record like high outer versal and boundless on here as well. But 1s is essentially where you have an infinite amount of conceptual transcendences essentially layered on one another. So, for example, take baseline outer versal. That would be number one. That'd be your first layer, your first conceptual transcendence above dimensionality, space time, yada yada. Then you would have a higher conceptual transcendence. You would transcend outer versal the same way outer versal transcends everything below it, but just to that much of a higher degree. You would be baseline high outer, which would be number two, right? And if we were to include boundless, this is more of a VSB thing. Character stats doesn't have it. Debates Jungle Wiki has boundless as well, but theirs is different. We won't talk about that in this video per se. But the VSB one is essentially would be at number three on baseline anyways. You can obviously have 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, all these different like infinite layers, points, something of in outer, right? You have like infinite layers into outer versal. For example, that's outer plus. And then you have like infinite layers into number two. That would be high outer plus. If you have infinite layers into high outer, and it's like with boundless, essentially, if you have infinite layers into boundless, it would be like boundless plus. And if you conceptually transcend that, the whole hierarchy, the framework, you'd be four. You go all the way up. You have an infinite amount of those type of transcendences. You'd be 1s, like baseline. So keep that in mind. So yeah. So the world tree can actually be legitimately put on the table as 1S, or even if you really want to lowball, high outer plus, boundless plus, very easily, to be honest. Like, that's the scaling I usually go with. Those ranges very easy to do, very reasonable, I would say. And Thor has other feats. Like, we've seen two other Thors, Eric Masterson and another Thor from the future clash, and their clash simultaneously affected all planes of reality and stretched across the entire cosmos. So that's another feat to definitely keep in mind and take into consideration, folks. We also have someone like Loki, who's inferior to Thor in terms of just raw power. Like, Loki briefly fought and simultaneously affected every conceivable astral and metaphysical plane. When he fought Odin briefly, they went into their metaphysical states, and they simultaneously affected every conceivable astral metaphysical plane. And to say Thor won't be able to accomplish a feat is just nonsense, because Thor himself has bullied Base Surfer before, pre and post Annihilation Wave. Like, Thor has actually dented his forehead. Pretty crazy stuff when you think about it, because Surfer has actually tangled with Loki as well, like a bloodlusted Surfer. And Surfer in himself is absolutely nonsense when you think about it in terms of AP and speed. So, yeah, with that all out of the way, I would say it's easy to put Apocalypse anywhere from high outer plus, boundless plus, or even 1S. Likely a layer or more into it, to be honest, if you really want to go that route, which isn't a bad route to go, in my honest opinion, and from speaking from experience. But that being said, I'll get more into some other scales in my final thoughts, but I'll go ahead and move on to speed for now. So obviously, speed, you can easily get this dude massively hypersonic, but like MFTL plus, massively faster than light plus, infinite speed, so far into it, it's insane. Or if you go with character stats, they got inaccessible speed. You can easily accomplish that too with Marvel and a lot of its characters. Or you can even argue immeasurable or even irrelevant, to be completely fair and honest with you people. So even if you go on the lower ends, he would just be very high into finite MFTO plus speeds or even infinite speeds, because the Marvel universes are infinitely large very consistently. So with that out of the way, like I mentioned, I'll go over some other little ranges and like hypotheticals later for my final thoughts. I'll go ahead and hand the mic over to Captain Forrest. Let him talk about some stuff.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and give some additional hacks and abilities that Apocalypse brings to the table. Now, we all know with Apocalypse, there's the infamous ability where he was able to absorb Cyclops' optic blast. It was even a full powered one, which is pretty impressive, just casually, just absorbing it. And this absorption ability was actually causing Cyclops to lose control and stagger himself, which was pretty impressive. Another showing for Apocalypse was when he was able to redirect the full force psychic attack from Jean, and just basically fuse Jean as like very inferior to him. He's able to do that. He has some psionic resistances, some mind reading abilities. He's also shown to telepathically battle with Jean. They've scrapped telepathically, which is pretty impressive. He's also shown some other assets such as BFRing people from battle. He can remove them if they're becoming a problem. He can also corrupt beings, both mind, body, which is impressive. He can make them their heralds to serve him, kind of like Galactus, which is pretty cool. He has full control over his molecular structure, and he can shape it however he likes. So he can make himself big, small. He can pretty much shapeshift his body into many things. He can also like open holes in his body to avoid attacks, which is pretty cool. He can create tendrils, spikes. He can also grab his opponents, and or for range he can also like increase the length of his arm, and also create big massive fists to pretty much one-shot his opponents. He also has energy projection, so he can pretty much project a energy blast from his hand. He can also use heat vision to blast at his opponent. So he does have some energy projection abilities, which is cool. Now, of course, Apocalypse has his own resistances. So he's been able to resist like soul attacks, mind attacks. He's taken some pretty crazy stuff over the years. And he's been able to take some conceptual attacks too, especially like fundamental attacks. He's no stranger to conceptual attacks himself. So yeah, that's pretty much it for Apocalypse. I'm going to go ahead and move over to Black Adam. Now, we all know Black Adam, his infamous stuff in the comics. Before I get into the main course, I will talk about some appetizers. Now, we all know that Black Adam, he's shown to be in Superman's league. He's boxed up Superman raw with no lightning, which is pretty impressive. He should easily scale to the Justice League. He's easily above the likes of Martian Manhunter and Flash, AP, even rivaling Wonder Woman as well, which is pretty impressive. We literally see Black Adam give Hawkman the abusive stepdad beating, the Air Force One energy, just ripping this dude to shreds, literally plucked Hawkman's wings and sent that dude flying, which was pretty hilarious. But of course, all those feats are just appetizers. The main course is the scaling when it comes to the battle with the Dark Army, and I'm actually referring to is Justice League 2018 in issue 75. The Justice League Incarnate and the Justice League do battle with the Dark Army. All of the characters, the iconic characters like Darkseid, the Quintessence, Spectre, Empty Hand, Upside Down Man, and other characters like even Doomsday. He even succumbed to the dark influence and the chains. All those infamous villains, they're all powerful. They're all amped by the great darkness and the chains. They're all taken over by the dark influence. And why is this all impressive? Great darkness is built different. We literally see Black Adam use his Shazam lightning to destroy the great darkness's chains that were wrapped around Darkseid. Not even Darkseid could get out of it. And this was like the same Darkseid who one-shot the Quintessence, absorbed all past versions of himself into himself, and Darkseid is unable to break out of those chains, which is absolutely insane. And another showing was when, literally in the same comic, Black Adam physically damages Empty Hand, and he also one-shots Pariah with his Shazam lightning. So right off the bat, from the low ends, easily high Ultraversal plus, if not boundless or above baseline boundless, very easily boundless plus. Some really good scaling for Black Adam. Now onto speed. Black Adam easily has immeasurable to irrelevant speed. In fact, he has his own irrelevant speed feat. He was able to literally use his raw speed alone to travel to the God Sphere, like a high Ultraversal difference. If you compare it to the other lesser realms in the DC multiverse map, which is absolutely insane. It would require these high degree amount of speed in order to reach this realm, otherwise you'll never reach it, be inaccessible. So it's insane. Of course, Black Adam does scale to other characters who have immeasurable speed feats like Superman, who can basically blitz reality blitzing missiles that was sterilizing the continuum, and Superman himself was able to move inside the source where there's literally no direction. Insane. So some solid, solid speed feats, solid irrelevant speed feats, at worst immeasurable. Now that's it for Black Adam's stats. I'm going to go ahead and talk about how Black Adam works in his abilities and character. He likes to rip his opponents apart. He's barbaric. He's very destructive and savage-like. His Egyptian pantheons assist him, give him all the tools he needs to operate in combat, especially with the wisdom of Sephawit. Sephawit gives him advice, gives him raw, precise, underhanded tactics in order to defeat his opponents, and he applies this in combat, and it also helps him to debunk or to reveal any hidden traits about his opponent. So every time he gets into battle with someone, he will never go into a fight with, unsuspecting, or he won't go into a fight blind. He'll know what he's getting himself into. Another thing for Black Adam is his signature lightning, his conceptual, spiritual, magical lightning. He can call upon Shazam to lightning his opponents. He can roast his opponents with lightning. He can imbue his attacks with lightning to physically damage his opponent and affect them to that degree. Black Adam also has some really good endurance feats and resistances. He can survive in the Sea of Souls. He has good mind resistance, able to fight off Martian Manhunter's mind hacks long enough to call upon Shazam to lightning Martian Manhunter, which actually one-shot him, which is pretty impressive. And Black Adam just has raw grit, raw determination, moxie. He won't give up until there's nothing left in the gas tank. So that's pretty much it for Black Adam. He's very resilient. I'm going to go ahead and pass over the mic. They're more than welcome to give their thoughts on who they think wins.
Sure. All right. So from hearing both of these, I'd say this is a pretty decent matchup. Seems like they're both pretty decent into the same tier. They have, excuse me. So there shouldn't really be much of a stat problem. In terms of ability mix-up, the absorption would be really good for Apocalypse. He would just absorb a lot of what Black Adam is going to throw at him. He's going to absorb his lightning, and potentially he'll grow stronger by just making himself bigger. Although there are a few questions I would have, like with the attack reflection, would that just be, just psionic, or would that would that apply to other more physical abilities? Because it applies to other physical abilities, then he'd also be throwing a lot of what Black Adam throws at him back at him. Although with Black Adam, the wisdom of Solomon would probably let him know with this type of stuff and probably try to get him to go about this in the most optimal way possible, which is just straight fisticuffs. Now, whether or not he can break the armor, or whether or not he can break the celestial armor and just beat down Apocalypse is a bit of a tricky question. I feel like if you're decently into the tier of 1S, then it is definitely a decent possibility. But with Apocalypse's, slippery nature, as well as him being able to teleport and able to absorb a lot of his attacks, then it'll mainly come down to fisticuffs. In which case, I think this will probably be a pretty even fight. So if I were to give a overall conclusion, I would say I might have to give it slightly to Black Adam, considering with how the wisdom of Solomon works, he should be able to figure out Apocalypse's moveset is, and he's going to just beat him down more consistently as he scales, mainly because he might outscale a little bit in strength, considering with how Thor scales was more directly into the tier, whereas Apocalypse scale goes into the tier by holding his own. Although Black Adam was able to fight and actually beat people who can contend with people in the tier. So I would say just off of that, Black Adam scales a little bit higher, which would give him the amount of AP to rip through the armor and actually take the win. But I'd say this is a very extreme diff one for me. Either side, if you want to take either side, I am completely fine with it. I just think from what I've heard currently that Black Adam would be a little bit stronger and would take the battle a little bit, like in a 9.99 diff.
Right on. Hey, fair enough. All right, I'll just go ahead and give my thoughts real quick and then pass the mic back over to the good captain. He'll give his final thoughts. So for me, I'll give a couple scenarios like I mentioned real quick. I mentioned earlier, I'll give a couple hypotheticals real quick for my finals. So for me, here's me. My thought would be Apocalypse takes victory more often than not. And I would say holding your own evenly with two Thors is actually more than enough, in my humble opinion, to overcome what Black Adam has done. And here's the thing. I already have Thor on his own, an individual Thor, beating Black Adam 1v1, in my opinion. So, obviously, in this situation, I'm going to have a thought of, wow, Apocalypse isn't just contending with a single Thor who's actually putting in work. He's contending with two Thors who's putting in work and evenly matching them, fighting them on equal footing. It's like, sure, he eventually gets overwhelmed, but that's the thing. It took two Thors, one of them being Jane Foster as well, to eventually overwhelm Apocalypse. Not just one, but two. And again, I already think one Thor is enough to beat Black Adam with a fight, in my opinion. But depending on the tier you go with, that brings me to this. I honestly do think 1S is a fair tier to use. But if we were to stick with like high outer plus or like layers into balance for both, from what I've seen and heard, I would honestly say Apocalypse does have the edge in those tiers too, like higher into it, like a little more comfortably and a little higher into it, like they're in the same tier. But just especially with that feat with Thor and the infinite hierarchies and a lot of the realms stacked up in Marvel as well, I would have to lean a little more towards like Apocalypse in the AP department regardless. But honestly, when it comes to speed, I do think it's a little easier to argue for Black Adam in that way, having that edge, to be honest. I think it's a little more comfortable for him having the speed edge. You can definitely get Apocalypse in the same tier, but I do think Adam's swifter. You can argue more layers, and that could help as well. That could help with his fundamental lightning, his metaphysical lightning. But again, that celestial armor, in my opinion, is a really good counter, a really hard counter for that. Like, I don't see that lightning really getting through that celestial armor inherently. Not inherently. And plus, Apocalypse himself has tussled with fundamental elements and archetypal entities himself. So, I mean, celestial armor itself is literally archetypal, right? I mean, Thor's true nature, Thor himself is an eternal archetype, his true nature. But that's beside the point. And again, you have Apocalypse fighting two powerful manifestations of Thor. So I would just say overall, in that route, I would have Apocalypse take it more often than not. I would say he's higher into the tiers, any of them, and he has more comfortable 1S scaling. If you go with the highest routes for both, then Apocalypse just has higher into these routes and a higher route too. But Black Adam isn't at a disadvantage in every category. But I do think Apocalypse takes it more often than not. And now for another route, like the Death Battle one, obviously, if they use the Thor feats of him fighting Thor, they already recently had Thor on there. And I believe they had Thor in the multiversal range. I think they used volume scaling, and they had him somewhere like finite multi off that. But I think they also applied multi plus, because they put a scan on the screen for like the Yggdrasil having infinite universes, which obviously the world tree is way beyond multi plus, which we've already talked about some, but you get the gist. We're going down this route now, this rabbit hole, right? This Wonderland. So, like, I definitely see them directly scaling Apocalypse to what Thor has done, or at least very relative, somewhere in that ballpark, for sure. That's definitely a very big possibility I see. And they use like the stats they gave him recently, scaling to the speed, which isn't bad at all, in my opinion, for them. And then obviously with Black Adam, I'm not sure if they're going to scale him to the, multiversal Hal Jordan stuff they gave for GL, in Green Lantern versus Alien X, or they're going to use like uni stuff that they've mentioned for DC here and there, or other multi-plus stuff that they've implied. So it's like, and obviously some insane speed feats. Like if they go this route, like this is more of like the Death Battle route per se, which is, I mean, for them it's fine in my opinion. Like these kind of stats, then I can definitely see Black Adam edging out. Like he might have, but even then, right? If they did have Thor at multi plus, that's again one Thor. If they have Adam at multi plus, again, Apocalypse. I know I said again a lot. I take a shot every time I say it again. But again, Apocalypse fought on equal footing with two multi-plus Thors. So, again, if they scale Adam to a single multi-plus feat, this guy's fighting two characters who can perform the same feat. So, this is really something to consider. If they go this route, it's kind of hard to say for right now who I think overall Death Battle will have win. I know who I would have win over more often than not, like overall, right? But for the Death Battle one, it's really close. I mean, it could be argued close either way. I just have Apocalypse overall winning with the AP edge. Like the speed edge won't be a big disadvantage. He can handle Black Adam stuff and just overall beat him. And then the Death Battle route, it's closer. You could definitely argue for Adam, especially if you only have Thor like finite multi, like the volume scaling, or if you go with the infinite route, like with the World Tree. If they go that route, then they would be on equal footing if they scaled in that sense, so to speak. If they scaled Adam to multi plus 2 with like reverse flash stuff, other stuff like that they used, Adam might have the speed edge with other calcs they had. They're both be really fast and finite, but so yeah, that can go either. Overall, I'm actually looking forward to this. I hope it's reasonable, right? I hope it's enjoyable. So I would lean more towards Apocalypse. I can see it going either way on, with the stats they've already given. So I'm going to hand the mic over to Captain Forrest, and that's all I really have to say. Hope y'all have a blessed day.
All right, so that's going to round up both of them. Okay, I'm going to give my thoughts on who I think wins more often than not in this situation. Now, Corin has given his amazing scaling for Apocalypse, and if we was to break this down, even if we go up the ladder and we go down the ladder too, Apocalypse would range higher into AP. You know, he'd range easily higher into like High Alta Plus or Boundless Plus or 1S. He just scales vastly above Black Adam, unfortunately, even if he was to make the fight more fair and kind of go into Black Adam's terrain of AP. It's just way too high. There's just nothing Black Adam has to put him in the AP department. So Apocalypse takes AP speed. I would say that Black Adam does scale higher into the irrelevant speed section very easily. More layers, he's more swifter in combat, so he does have the speed edge. Now, when it comes down to the initial fight itself, Black Adam, yes, the Wisdom of Sephiroth will give him some help in the fight. However, you know, advice can only do so much when you don't have the means to take your opponent out, since Apocalypse has the AP, especially with 1S scaling, just vastly above Black Adam. Yes, Apocalypse may have a little bit of a hard time at first trying to swat Black Adam, but once Black Adam tries to get in, you know, it's pretty much pickings at that point. The lightning, I'd argue Apocalypse would just absorb it pretty easily. In fact, Apocalypse is no stranger to taking fundamental attacks. He's taken magical lightning from those Thor's hammers, like from Jane Foster and Eric Masterson. He's taken, you know, fundamental and conceptual attacks and archetypal attacks. It's no stranger to Apocalypse. He'd be able to resist those things and take those things to that degree. So ultimately, I think with the resistances and the ways to neutralize the lightning, that's going to be a very hard counter against Black Adam's approach in combat, and Black Adam is unable to act savage or pretty much barbaric because he doesn't have the AP or the means to even affect Apocalypse, especially with the celestial armor. Way too strong. So overall, I have to give victory to Apocalypse, unfortunately. I do like Black Adam more, but we have to go off, you know, overall objective truths and what these characters show, not based off our feelings. So Apocalypse would pretty much just tear Black Adam apart. The AP is just way too much. But yeah, that's my thoughts on who I would think win, you know, who I think wins, you know, from our perspective and research. Now, Death Battle, as Corin as Corin puts out there politely, could go either way. Just depends on what scaling they use. You know, they're using finite AP, finite speed, so I don't think speed will be an issue on any account. So yeah, see how it goes. But yes, if anyone has any final thoughts, they're more than welcome to give their final thoughts.
A little bit, because my main thing was, I'll be honest, I did kind of let the 2v1 slip my mind a little bit. So I guess if you were to take the 2v1 into consideration, and I'll be honest, I'm not as knowledgeable on DC's like layering, so I did kind of assume that it was more on equal footing when talking about the source wall and things of that nature. So I guess if we were to, but after hearing y'all's interpretations, I would have to agree, at the very least, with Giant Apocalypse, because with Giant Apocalypse, not only does he have stronger AP to be able to take on 2, so he would be a lot more solid into the tier. So I'd say, if you want to, even giving Black Adam benefit of the doubt, at the very least, Giant Apocalypse is beating him, personally.
Okay, awesome. Alright, so that's going to round up this prediction video. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.
Peace.